Anyone know if Mark is around?
He's added agenda items, so I would have.
Oh, okay, there he is.
There he is.
Looks like you just summoned him.
Hey, folks. Hey, everyone. Welcome. If you could, as a reminder, if you could register your attendance in the meeting notes as usual, just pasted the link in the chat. And if you have any agenda items, please just add it to the notes. We have a couple, right now what's on the agenda is a couple discussion topics from issues that came up this past week, or the past 2 weeks, I guess, since we didn't meet last week. First, we could welcome any new members if there's anyone new here. If you want to say hi. No, it doesn't look like it. Okay. Quick note on scheduling. Next week I'm out, so if someone could run the meeting, that'd be great. The following week is another US holiday. It's Juneteenth. I don't know if we need to decide now whether to go, but I'm off, for example, and a lot of US companies are off. So I guess you could decide next week whether to cancel the following week or not. Yeah, it's a new US holiday. What, last year was that the first year that became a public US holiday? Yeah. So that's always nice, getting an extra holiday. Okay. The first topic I want to discuss is issue 870. Let me actually try to. Just correcting notes. So it ends up that the provenance spec is ambiguous. There's a discrepancy in the type of a field. There's an annotations field on like resolved dependencies. Briefly, the reason why it came up is that the text says one thing, it links to the in toto specification, which defines the type as being a JSON object. We have a Q and proto file that also describes it, but that says it could be any JSON type, not just object. And because it's effectively defined in two places, and we don't say which one has priority, it's ambiguous what's allowed. And so, like, the technically correct thing to do is to resolve the issue and bump the dependency. Resolving the issue is, I don't know if we necessarily need to discuss it here, like specifically how to resolve it. I think we could just say one, in the event of a discrepancy, one can have priority. And we could choose whether it's object or any type. But the thing I wanted to specifically bring up at this meeting is an issue that Arno raised. I see that he just joined. Welcome, Arno. Which is that we had decided on V1 to version the two together. Version the spec, like the levels, and the provenance format together, because most people just call it the same anyway. But already we immediately have the need to do a version bump of the provenance, And it's not super desirable to do a version pump of the spec because nothing else has changed in the spec. So I wanted to just bring up that topic to see if people had thoughts one way or the other.
Did we specifically decide against patch versioning, major, minor, patch?
No,
Because
but so
this was a problem that we're fixing. It wasn't an intentional.
yeah, but so we state that we use semver, and according to semver, this is a breaking change, so it requires a major version number bump. Which, as Mark said, I don't think anybody will say, okay, here's SLSA. Here's SLSA 2.0. And people are going to be like, what? And we say, oh, yeah, we're just changing a type of an attribute in the format. And everybody's going to be like, what? Are you kidding me? So it's a very unfortunate situation.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like, I think technically the proper thing to do for following strictly is the semantic version bump, or is the major version bump. The question is, will that cause more confusion? Because ultimately the purpose of all of this is to reduce confusion, right? Like the reason of semver is that we have a major, minor, and patch to indicate breaking changes and like what people set expectations. But at the same time, you know, will it cause any confusion by having an immediately new version of SLSA? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about solutions, but I will want to talk about just from practical, you know, like one of the things I think from a practicality standpoint, whether it's here or there, is as far as I'm aware, nobody's actually using SLSA v1 yet. The actual I mean, they might be implementing it internally, but I have not seen anyone other than myself actually like develop. I mean, I know that there's a couple of libraries that have done it, but most of the tools still haven't used the new version. Everything's using v0.2 of the provenance still. So in the very least, whatever direction we end up going, I think it's going to be a relatively minor hiccup. Like, I don't think there's going to be anybody who's like, oh no, now I got to re-implement everything. But yeah, just want to throw that out there.
So I think you're probably right there, but I mean, it's worth pointing out that so the spec as it stands is broken. It's not just that, oh, it's not saying the right thing. It's saying two different things, right? Because if you follow the link to the definition that, you know, that points to the in toto attestation spec, then you get a different definition than the one that's embedded in the spec. So in effect, our spec embeds two different definitions that are contradictory. Question is, you know, I fear that, you know, the right one is the linked one. And this, you know, as some of us have commented, it would have been better if we had stuck to just one and not try to embed it, because this is why we have a problem. But, you know, the question is, which one do people actually use? You might think, well, people are just going to go through the in toto attestation spec and implement that format, and then everything is good, and because that's the one we want. But I fear that in reality, people just see the one that's embedded and they use that. But I don't know. It would be worth doing a bit of a survey on that to see if we can, you know, what people are doing.
I mean, I've had problems finding anyone using 1.0 yet because we've been trying to implement it and get our customers to switch over from 0.2 to 1, and everybody's still on 0.2.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Anna's saying, only with the additional kind of coloring that I think people are trying not even to read our spec and really just want to get a library that implements the format. And so the users of V1 that I'm aware of are all using the same like Go implementation, and so I think that's a factor. Like what does that implement? But yeah, ultimately, I think what Anna says is right. People are going to do the thing which requires least effort, and that's either taking a library that claims to implement it and using that, or reading exactly what's written on our website because an extra click is too much effort. I don't know how this helps decide what the right outcome is, but I think it's just context on how we anticipate people are understanding the spec, right?
I also do think based on a couple of things. One is, and I don't know if for future sort of reference, I think it might also make sense for us to sort of talk to, because I know we were talking about precedents, but like, for example, here, I think it is worthwhile to kind of like, if in toto is the one that defined the original thing and it was just a typo on our end, that we should have never done it in the first place. Like I do think that like we should have some guidance around like something like that in the future around, you know, like I would prefer something like, hey, if we define something in two places, yeah, that's definitely a huge mess up on our standpoint. But if one of our dependencies, in this case in toto, has defined it differently than maybe how we stated it, I would say we, you know, our dependency takes precedence. And then we should also make sure that whatever we link to is a static link, so that we also don't end up inadvertently pulling in like a new version of that thing if it does get updated.
I have a naive question here, which is, I'm guessing it might be possible in one, but not the other. But is there a way in protobuf, for example, to link to a particular protobuf defined elsewhere, specifically at a certain URL? I don't think so, but I'm curious.
I mean, this isn't really specific a protobuf thing. I think we happen to be using protobuf as a schema definition language, but the spec is also written in English and it says type object. So I think they disagree. You know, and when we're using JSON as the format, I think it just is kind of an implementation detail that is proto.
True, that's a good point. Yeah, even if we had linked it to the other thing, we could have still messed up in the English, right? Good point.
Yeah,
And
the same
just
thing
to
goes with the JSON schema or anything else.
Yeah, and to follow up on, you know, what Mike was saying, it's like when we have multiple definitions, I mean, we might want to still do that in the future because it's convenient, but then we have to, I think, you know, I think static links that points to something that's not going to move is a wise thing to do, but we also should have some wording about, you know, if there's a discrepancy, this is the governing version, because this is how you avoid this kind of situations. And, you know, it's just lessons learned that we have to remember moving forward. Unfortunately, it doesn't, you know, help addressing the issue at hand.
Yeah, and to take that, I don't want to. I don't want to beat a dead horse or anything here. And because yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think I know it's one of the things also that if you look at how SPDX is trying to develop their version 3, they're trying to pick a format that is completely as unambiguous as possible, so that they can define it literally in one place. They can import definitions from other places as opposed to ever restating the definition. And the idea would be that sort of, I think they're using RDF or whatever, but using that is like, that is the 100%, this is the canonical definition. And, you know, if it would not in any way be different, like if it uses a dependency on a particular other object or other type, it would refer to that other type as opposed to re-implementing it. Yeah. once again, I'm not saying use RDF. I'm just saying that's kind of what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about like how we can actually fix the problem. I think we could do one of these things. To resolve this particular thing, first of all, I guess it's worth spelling out like what is the problem, what is the breaking change. The issue is right now, if you have a parser that follows the in-toto spec and only accepts types object, and something then generates of a different type, like a string or an array, then it'll choke and it won't accept it. Like it literally won't parse the file. That's basically the issue. Yeah, Arno.
So, I like to know the rules, but I always say it's good to know when to break the rules, because that's what makes life livable. And so I would like to propose that we then break one rule, which is same there. I think, in the grand scheme of things, this is probably the the lesser offense kind of things we can do, given that SLSA 1.0 has not been out for very long, that we don't know of any kind of major adoption yet. We probably are better off fixing it now. We call it SLSA 1.1 and call it done. And we can put a footnote, even if we want to, in the changes and, saying, yeah, technically this should have been a major bump, but it was really just trying to fix a mistake. And so we just called it a minor version, even though it should be more, so that people are, aware, and that's it.
Joshua, do you or I? Okay, anyway, what do you call? Yeah, I agree. We have to be practical here. We can't go to 2.0 just to fix this. I will repeat what I've said in the GitHub issue. We want to be careful about doing this also, because what if we find, hopefully not, touch wood, but what if we find yet another, backwards incompatible fix? We want to be careful not to accidentally use this escape hatch too often, but I think everyone understands this. The other one is, I wonder if pointing to a reference implementation of the spec might help. But again, we have to be careful with the language there, because it's possible that the spec says one thing and the implementation does another. And you still need to specify which one takes precedence. Joshua.
I don't really have anything else to add. I think we should just fix this. Ultimately, like, the strict interpretation of what we have declared, I think, is that I can't articulate any better than anyone else has already done. So I'll just say I agree. We should just fix this without a major version bump.
That also sounds good to me. And I'm fine doing that. Just one quick question, just to play devil's advocate. One thing that Arno mentioned in the thread is, saying like about like we're tying the versions of this, like the levels and the provenance together. Just to think about it for 1 minute before we decide to do the other, which I'm fine with. If we did this now, effectively it would be ripping the Band-Aid, and we'd say, the spec has just a different version number than the provenance, and we just live with that. And when it comes up in the future, well, then it's just clear. We just bump the versions and the two are independent, and it kind of avoids that issue. What we found with 0.2 is that I think a lot of people were confused that the two had different version numbers, which is again why we tied them together. But just to say that this is an option. Is anyone in favor of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the problem that the issues that we always want to kind of avoid is like too much of the differences. Like I don't want to throw out too many solutions, whether or not it should be something like minor revisions can be an update to one or the other without them being necessarily in sync or whatever. I do think that there's like, going to be some confusion either way. Because like also at the same time, as we begin to pull in the other build track, the other tracks, right? Are the other tracks going to also be, if we have the source track, is that going to immediately be prepping for Salsa V2? Like, do we automatically just have Salsa V2 of the source track? And is somebody going to be confused by there's no Salsa V1 source track? I think it's gonna. I don't have an answer. I just think that it's going to cause some confusion either way. I just think whatever is the solution that is that right balance between allowing us to update without jumping through a million hoops and eliminating the majority of confusion. I think that's kind of the option, I think.
I think another option we should consider is just moving the provenance attestation or the two attestations out of the spec, out of the Salsa repository. Like there's the in-toto attestations repo where there's a growing number of attestations, so it would fit nicely there, or it could be its own separate repository to make the separate versioning less confusing. I can see pros and cons to each, but I think it's worth considering at least.
But so let me ask you a clarification, because that seems like an implementation detail in a way of like, it's still saying, let's re-separate provenance, the format from the spec, Salsa spec. And
Yeah,
they can live in, yeah, indeed, when you do that, you can just even move it to a different repo if you want.
Exactly, and I just think it has the potential to reduce the confusion in like, why is this version separately? But it also may make things more difficult in that having the two live side by side can make like editing them as one cohesive whole easier, right? So it's like, which do you prioritize? So far, we've argued that it makes more sense to have it live alongside the spec because then we can edit the two in tandem. They are effectively one part of the same project, and that's how we think about them and operate on them. But yeah, I'm not advocating for one way or the other. I just wanted to raise.
So the reason I raised my hand was a bit different, but it's somewhat related in a way. It's like, if we separate them again, I mean, don't we have to update the Salsa spec anyway to point to the new version? I mean, what's the tie there? And because in a way, if 1.0 says, well, that's the format we were using, you're supposed to use for provenance, and now we publish a different provenance version, the Salsa spec still says it's the other one. We haven't solved the problem. We still have to modify the Salsa spec. And that's why I'm hesitant to, I kind of like the idea. That's why I brought it up in the GitHub thread. But in the end, I was like, well, maybe this isn't really solving the problem. Maybe you could solve it once forever in separating that. But at least once we still have a problem, I think. But Mark, maybe you have a better sense of what the tie-in is there.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, we would need to we need to point, but I don't think it would require a version bump of the spec to just say, like, nothing in the provenance format, like semantically is changing. And so I don't think the spec relies on like a difference. It's not like the build model is different or like there's like a different concept of external parameters, et cetera. So, but it is a point that like that right now they're tied together in some. I don't know if maybe Chris is at the top of my list. I don't know if that means first or not, but let's go with Chris.
All right. Let's see. I've got a few thoughts. The first is that I don't think we need to bump the spec version to change the version number because the versioning page is not part of the versioned directory of the site. I don't know if that's an implementation detail or if it matters. I'm throwing it out there. I'm not a big fan of separating the two versions again, though, because we just reunified the versioning because it was confusing to implementers. And I'm worried that we will relitigate this every 2 months if we keep going back and forth. That being said, I think that we could make this correction as v1.1, just take our licks for there being a mistake in the spec, and maybe get a little bit less precious about bumping the version number. We can adopt patch versions if we're going, because we can expect kind of a lot of changes with an attestation format. But I think the biggest concern for me is that we not relitigate versioning every couple of months.
Marcel?
Okay, so I posted a link. There's a question around who should implement the provenance spec, like actually for in Go, that came up on the in-toto side a month or two ago. And there was actually an expectation that in-toto would be the implementer, even though there is a proto spec also on the SLSA side. Because we've been moving towards using protobufs to implement the attestation layer and predicates, we ended up with a separate proto definition that actually already imports the in-toto specified resource descriptor, right, which is the problematic type. So we have on the in-toto side actually merged a v1 provenance predicate. Again, I don't think it's really being used anywhere. So if we wanted to remove it, I think it would be a pretty easy fix if we wanted to remove it from the in-toto side. But I'm still sensing a little bit of sort of back and forth between who should own the implementation versus who should own the .proto spec, because I think there's potentially an expectation that those will be the same, or will sort of be that the .proto definition will be the source of truth. And so there being at least two around now is, yeah, also an issue.
Yeah, if I could, I think there's a way to fix this where we don't have to answer this question right now, whether we're moving the provenance attestation back upstream, so to speak. But I think it's definitely worth resolving one way or another. We should document this officially and decide. So.
Okay, so if any other thoughts, certainly it would be great to hear if you haven't spoken up yet. I think it sounds like the consensus seems to be on doing a minor version bump, like not splitting that. We technically it's a breaking change, but we kind of argue it's worth it in this one case. But we do make a minor version bump to indicate it. It's kind of like a compromise solution. Yeah, how about this? I'll propose that that's the solution. Any arguments against?
I think we should add as a chaser that we should like clarify what the status of the proto versus the Q file versus the written text versus in-toto spec is as part of that change.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I do think not for this conversation, maybe for something like next week or in the coming weeks, I would also be interested in understanding a little bit more what that canonical representation actually is, because I know that we're using protos, but without sort of some of the plugins you could use with protos, you lose a lot of the semantic meaning in there. You know, so it could lead to different implementations still breaking some of that. So just as an example, like, right, you know, the proto buff just sort of says digests are a string, And so, you know, one of the things I've been working on, that open source project Spectre does try to do as much as it can to try and actually pull in as much of the semantic meaning as we can, and then allows it to then generate protos and some of the other things from there. I know, once again, like the folks from the SPDX side are looking at RDF and some of these other tools. But I do think that it's worthwhile at some point to just sort of talk that over, just to make sure that, you know, we're not inadvertently causing folks who are implementing it, like they can serialize it correctly, but they're still missing the ability to actually validate it, because it turns out they're thinking they're generating a SHA-256 when they're not, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever articulated explicitly anywhere. I think it was discussed in a pull request that we didn't want the protobuf enqueue file to be like necessarily things that people use for their implementation. We wanted them to be like supplementary to the spec text to help people reason about what the spec is saying. That's my recollection, at least. And so as a consequence of that, we did like avoid complicated protobuf features that we didn't think were easy to read without being a protobuf expert, for example.
Yeah, I think regardless, we should have some sort of thing that says, in the event of a discrepancy, X has precedence. I'm less concerned about what specifically it is, as long as there's a clear thing that which one is canonical, that would solve this particular issue. If someone wants to work on a way to, like, you write it in one format and it gets copied to the other formats, like, that would be great. I looked into that for a while. Like, I started actually writing it in the proto descriptor, like writing all the documentation there as a comment in there, and then like you write markdown as a comment in a protobuf file, and then you could parse that. It's not that hard to parse, but the problem is actually authoring, because like writing markdown in a comment usually doesn't have syntax highlighting, and auto formatting gets messed up. So I thought it was kind of a pain. And that's why I end up just going with like handwriting the markdown and keeping the two in sync, because I thought like ultimately that was less work. And I don't think this would have actually fixed this particular issue, because we are like, we inline effectively we want to both link to the in-toto spec, but also inline it so people could read, so they don't have to jump between two different things. And that's where this particular problem lied, is that like we both copied it and linked, and the two disagreed, and we didn't realize that they disagreed. So yeah, literate proto definition is exactly what I wanted. But I thought, oh, can I make some sort of parse? I was like, you know what, I'm not doing a whole programming project just for this. So yeah.
Yeah, if folks are interested, I'm working on that sort of project. So if folks are interested in contributing, we could discuss. That's one of the things that actually we've been talking about a little bit in the SLSA tooling side, is even if it's not the canonical definition, having something that can translate between these things, at least reasonably, to get somebody, let's say 80% of the way there, is useful.
Okay, so I think we could we have enough now on the comment. We could recap the meeting and say the discussion centered around the solution, and then I suggest that we just follow up the rest offline on the issue, on the details of which should be canonical and how we implement. But I feel like the hard decision was kind of made. Yeah, Arno.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. I just want to say that if we think the in-toto attestation definition is the primary source, since we can, unless we can link from or add, I mean, we could, but you know, today we don't have a link from the Q version or the protobuf version, so that means the text you would want the text to be the primary source, and so that's what you would want to say. But as I pointed out, I don't think this is what most software engineer will take. I mean, I look at the protobuf because I'm like, yeah, this is in a much more concise way, something I can read very quickly and say, I know what that means. And I think that's what most people are going to do. This is why, I think if anybody has implemented, they will have used this and not click on the link, read through the table and all that. But yeah, so we have to decide, but it's not so easy here. But we can take that offline, I agree. I mean, at the same time, we should try to not wait too long. The longer we wait, the worse the case becomes, right? So we have to think carefully, but at the same time, being pretty, diligent and getting it done.
And this is actually good timing because Tiani was working, which we talked about before, of the using the branches to do the versioning, so we don't do like a directory copy. I guess technically it's a directory copy, but it does it through like Git, so we keep retaining the history. So I could work with him and do that for this version. This could be the trial run. So good timing on that. Okay, I suggest we move on to the next issue. Sound good? Okay.
Just for the
Chris?
sake of it, I think it's important that we should clearly mean it. This is the decision. The status quo is the consensus is we are going to just do a minor version bump. Right.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what you mean. So I put it in the meeting notes. It says that's what the decision was, and I plan to update the issue after the meeting, recapping that. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that's fine. I cannot see the minutes right now, so I didn't know. I just want to make sure it's captured. Thanks.
Chris, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so I remember someone mentioning a few weeks back the possibility of doing issue triage in these meetings weekly. So I put together a quick and dirty dashboard on GitHub. Let me see if I can share it. I have never screen shared in Zoom. Here it is. All right, did that work? Yeah, so this is the bog standard bug backlog template in GitHub. I do not have permissions to share it with the org, but I think it'd be great if we had this just living permanently on the projects page. So there are 2 issues that came in and also 2 PRs that I thought could, so going through them quickly now. This one I opened. The folks who build the GitHub generators are working on, I believe this came up specifically for their container build generator. They're missing the config source from the provenance format 0.2, and they think that adding an additional field to the external parameters that marks out the source code of the build is useful for making builds more reproducible based on their provenance. Thoughts?
I haven't seen like a strong articulation of why this is required. Like they've said that they think it's useful, but I haven't seen them describe how or why.
Mark?
Yeah, actually I spoke with some of the folks separately. I think what's needed is a model. Right now, we don't have a model for what the word source means. And that was like one of the things that we wanted to do with V0.2, and then went in the other direction of just say, we're not even going to define it because we don't need it. Yeah, and I agree. I feel like we kind of need it. My gut feeling is that this would be a good thing for a true V2. That like we kind of, someone talked about, it's almost like a divergence then convergence type of thing, where like you start out with one thing and then you have different use cases, so you kind of diverge based on different needs, and then you realize where the commonalities are, and then we could converge onto like some common model. That's my sense here, is that that like we don't have enough examples of build types to know what like the archetypes are, and that ultimately we'll find that like most build systems fall into this thing, and so we can make standard fields for that. But my sense is that we're not there yet, but I'm happy to be. Other folks disagree.
Last call for thoughts, and we can move on. It sounds like, sorry, it sounds like the decision here is to not take up this issue at the moment, wait for modeling work or additional examples. Is that correct? Okay. Then let me. All right, the next is 873. This was opened by, I believe it was David Wheeler. He is proposing, this is a big one. He is proposing either incorporating the concept of semantic equivalency into SLSA build level 4, or perhaps having a separate SLSA track for build reproducibility. Michael?
Yeah, so I read through this issue. Yeah, I think that the main thing is one of the key things that he brings up in there that some folks have talked about is sort of trying to separate out bit for bit binary reproducibility from some other definitions that are above and beyond what we currently have. So, and I think that's sort of worthwhile. I do also think that we should probably spend a little bit of time figuring out the definitions of those things, whether it's semantic equivalency, whether there's probably some other things in there that we probably also want to think through. Like some of the stuff that I know we had discussed was something like hermetic builds, or I think to what Mark had said, we should just sort of describe that thing. As opposed to necessarily just using a word or using a phrase and then defining it, maybe just sort of spelling it out. And so I do think that the idea there is good. Whether or not we should pick those particular words and phrases is I think up for debate.
Andrew, I just saw you put your hand down. Did you have something to say?
I did. I didn't come off mute. Getting used to Zoom again. Mark and I had a little bit of a conversation around this in the hermetic issue as well a couple weeks ago. I think that it makes sense to have a reproducible track. And some of the requirements from the former hermetic requirement, like dependency pinning, to me makes more sense to be in a reproducible track. I know you saw that I just commented on this issue during this call. One challenge that I feel like we'll have to contend with as we create additional tracks is what the common theme is for each of the tracks. So like for the build track, how I've justified it in my head at least is that we're working on build platform hardening in order to get complete provenance generation. And so that's where the complete resolved dependencies fits in, which arrived or which was like the previous hermetic requirement. If there's not something like, and so I don't know if we need to have like some kind of summary on each of these additional tracks that says this is the core tenet that we're trying to achieve with this track. I think that we could achieve, I think we can figure that out for a reproducible track as well. And so I think that it does make sense to me to have a reproducible track.
All right. Trishank, I believe, is next.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't sure who was next. Yeah, I agree with keeping reproducible builds, semantic equivalency, different gradations for that in a different track. I also agree that it's important to figure out what's common to it, because at least to me, it's not clear that while it's not even clear to me that you necessarily need a hermetic build environment for reproducible builds. I mean, I could always look outside so long as that third-party mirror is reproducible. I don't necessarily care whether I'm using something hermetic. Anyway, just wanted to bring out, yeah, we need to figure this out. What defines a reproducible builds track?
So along those lines, yeah, I think one of the things that I think has proven useful from a communication standpoint was if we take that main diagram we have on the SLSA site, from the SLSA site, we can what's been useful is being able to point to the box and saying this helps there. I have found that to be very useful in communication and also getting folks to understand. So for example, the build track, that build box where we had source, build, dependencies, and then publish or whatever, or package, something like that, it's been very useful to just be able to say, yep, this track works on that box. And so I think, if we go, let's say, make it separate from, as opposed to SLSA build level 4, we make it a separate track or whatever, I think it's worthwhile to just sort of explain exactly where that fits in. And maybe it's something like the box within the box, right? If the build provenance helps protect against this, then the build reproducibility track protects against, this, right? And point to where that might be in the diagram.
Okay, Mark.
So I guess I'll disagree with everyone else. I don't think it makes sense for reproducibility to be its own track. I think there's two things involved in the proposal. One is when comparing two artifacts, you don't just do a straight hash, but you look at them through some other comparison operation. That seems lower level than the specification. That's kind of an implementation detail. And I think it's completely compatible with even if you're not doing reproducible builds. Like if you just do a regular old build with provenance and something then mutates it, but the mutation's okay, you could do that. That seems okay. And then reproducibility, it seems like reproducibility solves a bunch of different problems, one of which is trustworthiness of the build and tampering of the build, which is the build track, and reproducible builds is one way of doing. A system of multiple verified reproducibles is one way of doing that. And then as Andrew said, like having like other properties that we care about, such as like all the dependencies declared up front, which is necessary for reproducible builds, could be another thing. But to me, it doesn't seem like reproducible builds itself is the goal, but rather that we're trying to solve some other thing, and that should be the track.
Yeah, I agree with Mark there. I think I could be convinced if we wanted to go into something akin to like, because if I think about what we've built so far, you're talking about securing the build infra and making sure that a bad build itself can't compromise other builds. You know, like if I start to think about what the goals of the current track are, right? And so far, nothing in the existing build track actually talks about the security of the build you're actually running, right? We're sort of saying that's untrusted user code that we don't actually know if it's doing anything suspicious. But what we are doing is we're saying, hey, we're protecting against the build infra from being compromised either by a bad build or from you know, the build that you're using essentially like lying about what it did, taking keys and signing keys and all that good stuff. Andrew?
Yeah, and so I think that well, I'll take what Mark said, and I'll try and claim that we were still consistent with what I said before, that if we identify what that common theme is, it makes sense to have a reproducible track. And I think reproducible falls in the same scenario of hermetic. We shouldn't use the word reproducible. We shouldn't use the word hermetic. In the conversations that we've had around hermetic, I know I think a dependencies track was tossed out there. I think that still doesn't quite make sense. And so I think that a lot of these concepts fit well together and have a common goal, but what that core tenet is that we're trying to achieve needs to be sussed out. And I think that this is also a good one, or a good candidate for trying to figure out what it means to have a closely related but separate track, and how we can identify, or how we can maybe isolate what it is that we care about here, as opposed to there, where in this situation, I think it makes sense that the there is the build track. So what is the here versus the there of the build track, and how can we clearly differentiate that goal along with the multiple levels that we have in our mind to achieve?
All right, if that's everyone's thoughts, I guess we can move to PR triage. I don't know who added this, but I'm happy to talk about it. I know Michael Wheeler added tacos to the SLSA FAQ. It looks like a few people have already reviewed this and approved it. So yeah, maybe just an FYI to take a look at it before it merges.
I'll plan to merge that tomorrow if there aren't any objections.
Yeah, I think this is a really not very, it's just the FAQ, and we can be really relaxed about that one. I'm sorry, but I didn't get what's the takeaway from the discussion before, though, on the issue. I mean, what in terms of like we're supposed to do some triage here. What's the outcome of the discussion? What do we do with that issue?
I don't know. We can add it to the backlog. I think this issue only becomes actionable if somebody is willing to work on it, because it's quite a lot of work. So unless we have a volunteer, I propose moving it to the backlog category of the dashboard.
I mean, yeah, I think in strict terms of like issue triage, this issue is too large and needs being. We covered many topics as part of that discussion. It covers many topics. Ideally, it would be broken down into more tractable things, but as Chris rightly said, we need someone who cares about it to own it. I think there is a certain amount of folding into existing issues that could happen, or has probably happened. But backlog makes sense until there's someone that will action it.
All right, that's fine with me.
Okay, I think that's it. Okay, thanks everyone. Again, if someone could run a meeting next week, I'd appreciate it. And I guess I'll see everyone soon and talk to you online. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.